Jeff, welcome to the Peak Prosper Find Meaningful Work podcast. We're so stoked to have you on tonight, man. What's going
How
on?
you doing, Scott? It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, doing good. We were just chatting before we jumped live here. It's been years, man, and it's so good to reconnect with you. And I'm stoked to have a conversation about running and life tonight.
Yeah, I am too. It's good to see you.
So, Jeff, why running, man? Like, of all things, why running?
Um, I think the biggest for me, I've always been an outdoor person. Always even growing up on a farm as a kid in Missouri, like I was always outside. I only came in when my mom made me come in when it was after it was dark and the lightning bugs were out. I was out all from as soon as I was up in the morning till I was, during the summer especially, I was rolling through on our property and in the woods. And I just have always loved being outside and adventuring. As I got older, I got into mountain biking in college in the early 90s. Took some bike trips instead of, everybody else went partying on spring break, and me and some bros would go on mountain bike trips in like 90. I went to Moab in like 94, and 93, 94, and 95. We went to Scottsdale and Tucson and Sedona and Durango for one summer. And so I was really into mountain biking, got a job as a graphic designer, one of my first kind of career jobs out of college. My wife and I got married and we moved to Denver, and I started getting into climbing. And I was always running just a little bit, never a ton, just like 3 or 4 days a week, 20 to 40 minutes, get my dog out and like keep my dog from chewing off couch cushions, or something when they're young. And so I just was exercising my dog, and it was just for extra fitness. To really, I consider myself a mountain biker and a climber, and I was getting into backpacking when I moved to Denver, so went on some backpacking trips, and so I was kind of meshing I had all these different separate sports I was kind of in tandem pursuing, and really loved mountain biking, and I really started getting into climbing and backpacking, and that was really interesting to me. And that time I climbed a 14er, and with a buddy who was a fellow climber, was kind of mentor to me in those early days when I was in my 20s. And I was trail running a little bit, but when I moved to Bend, Oregon in 2000, I really kind of started trail running. I had a friend that was a trail runner, had done some ultras, and he kind of got me into it. And he kind of introduced me to the sport, to 100 milers, and I was like, what? People run 100 miles? That's crazy. And
Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, so I thought it was insane. But there was a little voice in the back of my head that thought that sounded kind of cool, and like what a cool adventure. And I'd heard of 100-mile mountain bike races like Leadville 100 and stuff like that, but I hadn't thought about ever running 100 miles. So that kind of took, that seed was planted, and I had worked in a running store in college at it was a bike shop slash. It was the specialty running store in Columbia, Missouri, where I went to a University of Missouri, and so like all the hardcore runners and triathletes came into our shop, and I was retail floor, so I was like helping those guys, and our owner had like run Boston like 25 times, and so I was like really kind of interested in this running thing, but it was all road running back then, and so I was a mountain biker. I like the trail, dirt, being in the woods, and I didn't really put the two and two together until I moved west, and I started seeing people trail running. Every once in a while I'd be mountain biking, you see some hardcore dude running up a mountain, that you were mountain biking on, and you're like, wow, that guy's kind of freaking hardcore, and and so then fast forward to Bend, and I ran a marathon and a half marathon because I wanted to run a 50K, and I used that as training to build up the mileage to run a 50K trail race in like February of 01, and in southwest of Portland, and in the coastal range, and I was hooked. I mean, I think in that process of kind of training for it and doing all these long trail runs, I started seeing this simplicity of trail running that is like moving light and fast with just enough gear to go the same amount of miles that I would on a mountain bike, but I was unrestricted, meaning the one of the things that you find as a mountain biker is there's some trails you can't go on. You can't go into wilderness areas. You can't go into, really steep terrain because you can't climb up it in a mountain bike. So you're hike-a-biking it if you were. And so some stuff's too technical. But as a runner and as a climber and a backpacker, those all come together once you're fit. So you can you can go, okay, yeah, I can run up that peak, and then we can hit that ridge line, and we can hit that peak, and then we can be back down and be at happy hour, Or if you start early, you're back for like brunch, So like the light and fast simplicity and I don't know, it was almost like primal, I guess, the whole trail running scene. And it was a really small cult sport when I started. It's still a small cult sport, but it's grown a lot in the 22 years I've been doing it. But that kind of was an organic relationship. It was just me oh, this is fun. I don't have to worry about carrying chain tool or bike pump or tubes or anything like that, or worrying about breaking down in the backcountry. I just have to go run with some gels and some water, and I can go run up that mountain and then run back. And so I think that simplicity and purity was kind of a cool attraction for me. And that's what really got me into it. And the community of ultra running, there's just a really cool community. And I just really got into it. And that's what really got me hooked initially.
So you're running for decades, right? And exploring the mountains. And what did you do to financially fuel and support your lifestyle? It sounds like you were doing some graphic design work.
Yeah, so I was part of I got laid off in the '01 bust. I was working for an advertising agency remotely from Bend and from Oregon, and it was a sweet setup, full salary, benefits, 401k, and I was been with the company 5 years. I worked for their regional staff, and I was one of their regional art directors. And at that point in my career, I was in my late 20s, or I guess I was around 30 when that happened. And my wife and I were just trying to start having kids. We bought a house in Bend. So, and we both got laid off in the .com bust a month apart. And whoa, that was my first...
Talk about uncertainty,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, that was my first introduction to yo, these corporate companies don't care anything about you. And they care about the bottom line, and that's all they care about. Even if you've been there 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it doesn't matter. So that was my first introduction to, if the economy takes a downturn, corporations don't care about you. And so I started my own business. I started my own design consulting business in Bend. I started contracting for some local agencies, and I had full-time clients by the end of the summer, and I was doing it full-time. And at that point, I had 6-7 years experience, so I had good experience. I'd worked for big agencies. I knew what I was doing. And so I just hit the ground running, I think I collected 2 unemployment checks. And then I had enough income after 2 months that I was rolling with my own business. And that became full-time for 17 years. Besides the hiatus when we worked together at that startup, I was only working, I had a 4-day-a-week contract, so I still could keep clients, part-time clients. So I think I took 3 years where I was working 32 hours a week on an employment contract at an internet startup in Bend, G5, that we used to work at together. That's how I met you, right? So that was kind of my whole design career. That whole scene, I was doing my own business, learning everything, how to be my own account executive, how to be my own accountant, how to be, what I could do well, what I was not good at, used contractors, web developers, production artists, learn to have part-time employees basically because you're using contractors. So how to manage people and all of that. And so it was great, business learning. It definitely went through the bust in 07, 08 when everything was really bad. I took on some business debt during that time. It was really a rough time. It was another introduction to hey, here's what a recession's like. And it's not very fun as a small business owner. It's almost like it targets small business owners. And so it was a tough time. But, I came out the other side of that and kept running that whole time. That was what kept me sane. Like the running piece was like, it was kind of my solstice, I was just like, or solstice, is that the right word? um, Soulless, is that the right word? I don't even know if I'm using it. It was
Source of peaceful escape.
exactly. It was a source of peaceful escape during that time. Like I had young kids. We started having kids. We had a kid in '02, '05. Then we went through the bust. Then we had another one in 2011. So I have three kids. And those times, I was the primary breadwinner. My wife, we had talked together as a couple, and we decided she really wanted to stay home, and I wanted her to stay home. I thought it was cool that she wanted to. Then she said she wanted to homeschool, and so, and which was been really cool. I was very skeptical, but it turned out to be awesome. We've been around our kids the whole time, like being able to like travel in off peak season because we're homeschooling. We aren't tied to that stupid public school schedule, and it was just a really cool scene for us as we evolved, and I continued to race and train, and the sport was so small. I got sponsored in '03, just like gear, free gear, and then that grew over time when I started winning in the late 2000s. After about 5 or 6 years in the sport, I started having some success, and then the sponsorship kind of grew a little bit, and it organically grew over time, and it still I never got a paycheck. I got a small paycheck. I think the first time I ever did was like '09, 2010, somewhere around there. So, it was like $1,500 a year, type of paycheck, like nothing. It's like, oh, that'll
Nothing,
get like
nothing to live off
yeah,
of.
it's like that'll get pay for like 3 entries this year, to into 100 milers. So yeah, it wasn't much, but I still there were points of as I was following that passion, I really loved it. I loved ultra running, I loved trail running, mountain running, and I loved the training, and I loved like I had a pretty flexible schedule owning my own business as a designer. So, but there was times when those two things butted heads a lot, where I had multiple deadlines and big projects, and I needed to be training and peaking for a race at the same week, and those kind of weeks were crazy. I lost a lot of sleep. I trained at weird hours. I'd go out for runs at 11 o'clock at night with a headlamp on, and come home at 1. And then get up at 7 and start working again, and stuff like that. But I loved it so much that I didn't really see myself wanting to give it up. And I think that was the important piece. Even when I was butting heads with it, with my job, I still carved time to do that passion, that passion sport, the sport I loved. And I think that's the important piece. That's a lesson, I guess, for people is there were a lot of painful years where it was like butting heads with my job, it was butting heads with my family time, it was butting heads with, and I carved out. I did a really good job. If you talk to my wife, there were some times of contention, and there was stress around it, me training, because I was choosing to go train 10 to 15 hours a week sometimes when I could be working at a graphic design job and making another 10 to 15 hours worth of income, and so I definitely chose lifestyle. I still took care of my family and put bread on the table, so to speak. But I still there was some stress around that at times for sure, and that was a hard time. And we finally I trained at crazy hours, man, during that time, like during that really stressful time when it was really butting heads, and so there would be people ask my wife, how much does Jeff run, or when does he run, how does he train and run his own business, and she's like, I don't know. He shows up when I tell him to show up, and he gets his training in somehow. He runs at crazy hours, sometimes in the middle of the night. And I did. I ran in the middle of the night sometimes. It was hard. It was a hard time, like a good decade of that.
Wow. Jeff, when was that aha moment when you realized that your passion for running could actually become a full-time income for you? When did that light bulb go off?
That would have been probably about 2014 or 2015. I'm trying to remember what year it was. I have a really good friend who had started an online, because with social media and video conferencing all coming online in like 2010 through 2014, in that window when we were working at G5, that tech scene was starting to grow a ton, and so this new industry popped up, online coaching, right? Like, so remote coaching. So, I live in Bend, Oregon, and I coach, a guy in California and a guy in New York and right, whatever. So I had a friend that was one of the early adopters of coaching. He had been in finance and had gone to Oxford, and he's a Brit, but had married an American, was living in Bend, had lived in Bend. We'd run together. He was a sponsored athlete as well. We were actually teammates by same footwear sponsors. And he had started a coaching business, and sponsorship money wasn't very much back then, in the early, like 2010, 2012 in ultra running. So we were getting little bits of money, but not much, and so it wasn't really, you couldn't even really put an hourly around even your training yet. The money wasn't good enough to even be like a part-time job, type of stipend. So, it was several $1,000s a year, and that's all you were getting. And so he and I went out for beers in Bend. He had moved to San Francisco. His wife got a job there, and then he had launched this coaching business for a couple years, and it was growing, like to the point where he was bringing on assistant coaches. And he just reached out to me and said, "Hey, let's go out and to a pub and have a drink. I'm in town." So we caught up, had some pints on the west side of Bend, at all the breweries, and we had a couple breweries, and then he had mentioned like, hey, and I felt like this was a really good point, and he's the one that gave me he planted the seed to give me the nudge, and he said, hey, you're only Jeff the athlete for a short window when you're successful of your life, right? It's a very short window, but if you can like establish yourself as Jeff the coach, you could theoretically do that till you're 80 years old. And if you become a guru in your sport. And I'd never thought about it that way, but I had coached people on the side, friends, acquaintances, help people out.
Yeah, I think you helped me train for my first 50 miler actually.
Yeah, and so I was giving a lot of free advice during that time, and I had been a student of the sport and trained myself and done all this trial and error over, at this point, 12, 13, 14 years. And at that point, 14 years, 15 years. And so I just kept doing it and learning, and I sat on that for about a year and a half, 2 years. So this would have been like 14, maybe beginning of 2015. Might have been the spring of 15. And I thought about it for a whole year. It just stewed in the back of my head. My wife and I would chat about it every once in a while. She's my sounding board and always has been. We've been married for 25 years, so we've known each other since we were 18 and 21, so I really trust her judgment. And she was like, you know what? You're such a geek about this sport. Like, you are like a tactician. You should do this, You should try it. And she's like, you don't have to do it full time. Like, just take on a few athletes. And I was like, well, that's kind of a good idea. So initially, all I did was take on 5 athletes. I sent out a social media post, said I'm taking on 5 athletes. And I had a good introductory, monthly cost. I started with a lower introductory because I felt like I wasn't, worthy of a good monthly, subscription model, because that's the way the coaching is, a subscription. And so I brought on some people, and they got the introductory rate, and I learned, being a graphic designer and formerly a production artist, because that's what you start as, really, as production artist. Even if you have a graphic design position, if you're low man on the totem pole, you are definitely doing production work. You're not doing anything sexy when you're an early designer. So you learn to be a really good, efficient systems person. Okay, I need to knock this out. I'm balancing 25 projects at once, and I need to do this with this deadline and this with that deadline. So there's a lot of good training that happened in my graphic design career that was applicable as a coaching profession. And so I just took that, and with all my tech background, I was like, okay, I'm going to automate all my systems. I'm going to automate my subscription models. I'm going to automate, credit card payments. If the credit card gets declined, using a third-party app software that, a SaaS software that like goes and captures that, canceled credit card, and I don't have to go like call people all the time. So I automated all that in the first year. So in 2016, I took on 5 athletes. Then I took on 5 more. And by the time I had 15, I was busy. I had 15 athletes. I kind of organically grew it in 2016, and I had like 10, then I had 15, 10, or 5, then I had 10, then I had 15. By the fall, I had 15. And I was like, at this point, I was like dialing in my onboarding and like how I talk to people and like what materials I was giving them, after they came on, and all the things that go along with coaching, and learning how to do it and how to organize my athlete roster, and kind of learning. And then that fall, I launched worked on my website in off season when I wasn't racing. And by Thanksgiving, I launched like full on website, like I'm open for business. So that was probably that was like a really good learning year, and it really set me up for success because of all the graphic design and marketing background I had and branding. And so I just kind of did that. I built a website. I'd been building websites for 15 years, and I just used all that knowledge to like funnel people, the right personalities to the right, everything we worked on when we were working at tech jobs. I kind of used that expertise to kind of grow it. And by after the summer of 2017, so within a year, I had enough athletes to kind of justify becoming full-time. And that's when we left Bend, because we moved to Utah, and it was a lower cost of living, and that allowed my job, I was no longer tied to Bend with clients. I still had some design clients that I was trying to juggle, some clients I'd had for 10 years or 15 years. So I still was, but I quit actively looking for business. I was really busy for a year, like where I was balancing graphic design, and coaching clients. And I was just like juggling. I was pretty stressed out during that year. But I loved the coaching, and I loved it so much that it was worth it. Because I was just like, I love this. And I kept telling my wife, I love this. I'm helping people. Like, I'm not like marketing some product that I don't care about and I'm never going to use. That's probably the soul sucking part of marketing design, is sometimes you're doing it for clients that you would totally use their product or service, and you love that client. You like, yes, I can totally get behind this and learn about this product. I'm going to know your unique selling point. I'm going to help you with your unique selling point, right? And fine tune it. But then there's other clients where you're like, I'm never going to use your service. I'm never going to use your product. I'm never going to buy it. I don't care about it.
But thanks for the paycheck.
And it's kind of icky, man, for lack of a better term. That's my technical. It makes you kind of feel dirty, like you're like helping someone, and you're using brain power that you don't need to retain any of that. Like, I don't want to know about your product, and I don't want to know about your service because I'm never going to use it. So I think that part of the job, after, I'd been working at that point 20 years as a designer, that's the part you're like, ugh, this is soul sucking, man. And
another one of these.
Yeah. And so that's when I was so excited about the coaching, because one, I'm helping people get fit. I'm helping them with nutrition. I'm helping them lose weight. I'm helping them get healthier. They're getting better, more confidence. They're stoked. I'm stoked. I get to talk about running every day. And so that was a really cool time in that transition. And I really started to hate design for a while during that time, because I loved coaching so much. And so I finally, at some point when we moved and my cost of living went down, and I got rid of my business debt with that move, because we sold a house and there was some equity there, so I could pull some equity and get rid of some business debt and buy a car outright during that time because of equity. Like, it really was a good move, like from a lifestyle perspective for my whole family. And all of a sudden I had, I wasn't paying out some stupid interest based, loan or something that I had for business. I got rid of that debt. And once I got rid of that debt, I was just like, that stress lifts. And then all of a sudden I'm coaching full time. And I had to get to the point where I was okay with turning down design work, because I still had that fear for about a year and a half or 2 years of that. Even when I went full time, there was still a fear there. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. I changed my whole career, you know?
How did you manage that fear? Because that's a big internal transformation that happens when somebody completely shifts to a new career. How did you manage the fear that came up and the uncertainty and the lack of 20 years of proof that this could be a viable source of income for you going forward?
I mean, I think it was easy because I loved it. And in that respect, I did have to, during that time, I played around with some different marketing ideas that some panned out, some didn't, of what I did. I kind of was experimenting during that time. And I think at some point, I just kind of like, in my head was like, I can't keep taking on design projects. They're just, every time I did them, it caused a whole bunch of anxiety and stress in my life. And even though at times, like, you're worried about not having enough athletes, or an athlete gets injured, or an athlete quits coaching because their season's over or whatever, I just kind of had to trust the process and be okay with it, and know that, like, this is part of the job, right? There is some churn, and this is part of the job. You got to keep, like, you can't ever let down, right? You got to keep, like, marketing your business. You got to keep driving people to your website. You got to keep, like, so I had to take that mindset of marketing for other people that I'd been doing for 20 years, and I had to do it for my own business, which I'd never done. I'd done it loosely, but I'd never really done it. So it was a time when I had to, like, say, okay, how do you talk about your business? What's your unique selling point? What's your niche? And really dive and like funnel down to what you do well, and focus on that first, and then the rest falls into place. And I think if you're following what you're passionate, and I also, the other thing that was really easy during that time, I have to admit, all of a sudden when I quit taking on design projects, I took away that butting heads aspect of, like, sometimes I'm training hard and sometimes I have a bunch of deadlines in design. All of a sudden I took that out of the scenario. So when I was training, like, everyone I'm training is an ultra runner or a trail runner. They understood where I was. They knew what races I had coming up. We chatted about it in coaching calls. So it was really cool because all of a sudden those two fed each other versus fighting each other. So my training and my athlete side, Jeff Browning the athlete and Jeff Browning the coach, were meshed together, kind of like this. It was just this really cool hybrid where that allowed me to just really focus on my training like I've always wanted to do, but also, because, you could do stuff like, hey, I'm going on this cool run adventure, and you put it on social media and you're a coach, like, people see you're doing it, and your athletes see you're doing it, and they're stoked, and you live in a cool place, and which is really beautiful. And some people don't, that are coaching under you. They might live in, like, St. Louis, or they might live in, Fort Lauderdale or something, and so they're like, yeah, I'm running pavement every day and flat, and I love mountains. So they get to see what you're doing, and they get stoked. So it feeds the business. So it fed the business. The athlete side started feeding the business versus fighting the business. So I just embraced that piece, and it kind of just organically fell into place after that. And I did have success. Now, I would admit there is a correlation to having success in the sport and more eyes on you, meaning more people trust you because, wow, you're how old and you're still winning? Whoa, that's crazy. And then those people say, yeah, well, I want to know what he knows, and so then they reach out. So that definitely helps.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting results and your clients are getting results, they fuel each other to just amplify the performance of your business.
Exactly.
And Jeff, I'm curious, what are some projects you're working on, either in your business or with some of your sponsors that you're really stoked on right now?
Um, I mean, I think the biggest one right now. I mean, I have a pretty good coaching roster right now, so I'm full time. Like, I have a wait list going on right now. I'm actually trying to figure out like how do I want to structure expanding the coaching business at this point. Like how I'm at a place where at some point you can only handle so much. Your bandwidth is so many hours and so much mind and physical power to put towards something. And so once you have a high enough demand for your business, then you need to think about how do I expand the business to take on more athletes that I don't necessarily have to oversee directly. So I'm talking with a couple of other runners as coming on as coaches under the business. So
Awesome.
that's been in progress for a couple of years, but I haven't launched it yet because I'm still kind of playing around with how I want to structure it. And sometimes you can overthink things. I'm probably at the point of
Mm-hmm.
overthinking it at this point that I just need to pull the trigger and just be like, okay, just do it and then figure it out as you go. So sometimes that's part of it. Pull the trigger, step out, step off the ledge, and like,
Yep.
yeah, there's the line. Go for it right there.
Fix it on the way
Yep,
down.
figure it out on the way down. Uh, I mean, you're a skier. You know how that is, right? Sometimes you just gotta like commit.
I mean, it's like running, skiing, business, relationships. If you don't take your idea to the playing grounds and test it and see if it works, you won't get any feedback ever to see what's working, what isn't
Yeah,
working,
and you'll
right?
never know. It may take off immediately, and it may need some massage. You don't know, and it may not
Yeah,
work at all. And then I've had one idea like where I was doing like these weekly like trail tips that people were paying like a small subscription for, and that was supposed to be like a funnel to feed the coaching business. But it became like this
I remember
giant
that.
beast that
Yeah,
was too much work for the income. And at some point, I was like, I, it was more stress than it was worth. And I started crunching numbers, and I was like, this isn't really penciling out this idea. And so I bagged it, And now I have a library of like 150 tips that I can still use as content for my coached athletes, but I'm not actively using it under its own model. So like there's times when you're going to have business ideas that don't pan out, and you got to know when to say when. Sometimes you just got to say, you know what, numbers aren't panning out. I've been doing this for a year and a half now, 18 months, and it's still not panning out. Like probably just like more trouble than it's worth, and you like put it to bed.
Jeff, you've become very successful in multiple careers, multiple business endeavors, and now as an ultra athlete. I'm curious. Do you have or have you had coaches or mentors or people that have really inspired and supported your dream and your passion? I mean, your wife is certainly one of
Yeah,
them,
for sure.
but are there others?
Um, I've had a few mentors, like Ian Sharman, who I was telling you about, that was the coach, that kind of put the seed in and really pushed me, kind of gave me a nudge to start really thinking about it seriously as a business. Um, he's probably the most influential, um, and he's been great. Some other coaches in the industry have been really influential for me. Travis Macy's another one who has his own coaching business in Colorado, who's also an ultra runner, and he does like adventure racing and some mountain biking too, coaching. He's been a mentor too. He was one of the early people I reached out to, and like there's a lot of guys I just reached out to and we chatted. It was just like it was guys I knew, I'd hung out with, I'd raced against, and I just called them up and we had an hour and a half conversation, and they kind of just nudged me in certain directions towards certain softwares that I was when I first was building the business, towards certain things to look at, how to structure certain things, how to onboard some people. They shared with how they did it, so they were really open with their processes, and that was really helpful in like kind of getting me rolling and giving me ideas, and then I kind of took those ideas and ran with them. Um, I have uh, um, I've always had like multiple friends in the that are ultra runners that are also tech people in the industry. that I've always like contracted with or were really good friends that I could bounce ideas off of. And they were really instrumental. My buddy Jeremy Monteau, who's a CTO of Trailhead Labs, and my buddy Riley Willits, who is a web developer who I contract. He was my main contractor. You know Riley, who worked at contracted G5 and did their website for years and years, the corporate website. Like he and I worked on a lot of projects, custom website designs together, and he and I still chat from time to time. So those guys I like still like.
Cool.
You know, sometimes it's just, you know, it's casual and we catch up and then we like start talking about business, and then, you know, all of us are entrepreneurs at heart, and, you know, you start bouncing around ideas. Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, what if we did this app? You know, like I'm always got about 1,000 ideas. That's the problem with being a creative designer. You have too many ideas, but the follow through isn't always there. So you're an idea guy, but you're not the guy to follow through. That's the one thing you learn as a creative person. You're a great CEO's type, but you're not a good like manager. Like I'm the guy who's gonna like take this idea to full fruition, right? Like I come up with the idea, you go run with it.
The get shit done guy.
Yeah, I'm not that guy. I mean, I do that with running, and I do that with my like athletes that I coach. But when it comes to like new business ideas and stuff, like I have 1,000 of them, and you know, I'm just constantly an idea guy, but I don't follow through with any of them. So, you know, except for a few over the years, you know. So you got to know your strengths and weaknesses too, as what your personality type is too.
Jeff, if you have any last insight for early stage adventurous men that are looking to start a business or take their idea and turn it into their full-time income, do you have any last mindset bites or practices that you would suggest for these guys to help them maintain their momentum through some of those challenging times, those experiences where they feel like they're running up against the wall, we call it in marathon?
I mean, I think probably one is if you have people that are willing to pay for whatever you want to do, like whatever that is that your business is, and if you have customers, if that means there is a need, right? So a lot of times it's just a matter of massaging how you talk about the business, that unique, you know, we talk about in branding, we talk about your 5-second elevator pitch, you know, you're like, you just jumped on you got 5 floors to tell someone what you do and get in a nutshell. Can you do that? And so one is putting ideas on paper. Don't just let them bounce around your head. Like write them down. Like have a notebook, you know, brainstorm, write them down, restructure them, reorganize them, rewrite them, think about them. Yeah, exactly. I got it underneath this computer that we're talking on right now. So like, you know, always do it. And sometimes those might sit for 3 years, some of those notes, or they might sit for 5 or 10 years, but eventually try to revisit them. And even better, revisit them regularly and rewrite them and think about them. Because the more brain power you put on them, the more ideas will. And sometimes if you have people you trust that aren't going to steal your idea, you know, or don't have the capability to steal your idea, then bounce it off people. Get people's feedback, you know, maybe even talk to people that are potential customers that are friends of yours, you know, that like might want that service or might want that product, you know, so you can go, okay, yeah, would you use this? Okay, yeah. Oh, and then they'll give you feedback, and that feedback loop's great, man. Social feedback loops. I mean, we are social creatures, you know, like we thrive on facial expressions, feedback, eye contact, touch, hugs, whatever, you know? And so like really putting yourself out there sometimes to people you trust so you can get some feedback, whether it's a good idea. Because sometimes they may just be like, not get it. You might get it in your head and they'll look at you like, I don't really get it, you know? And so, and that's not a good thing, right? So if they're not getting it, then you need to like rethink your idea or rethink your messaging, right? It might just be the way you're talking about it, right? And so you might need to fine tune how you talk about your product or service, right? So what I would say is just keep working. You don't, entrepreneurs are always working. We're always thinking, even if we're in a run, man, sometimes I'm just listening to podcasts about coaching. Sometimes I'm listening to podcasts about business, about like, that has nothing to do with coaching. Like I just read a book called, I'm drawing a blank on the title. It's Built to Sell. So it's an older book. It's been around for a long time, but it's great. It talks about productizing your service if you have a service, and finding your niche and not being like the jack of all trades. And it's a great book to think about when you're starting a business or you have a new idea or you're trying to be an entrepreneur. It's a great book for general concepts about how to think about your business. Because there's a lot of fear that drives business decisions at times, like where you're scared to let certain projects go. Like if you had a customer that's asking you for a certain project and it's not really in your expertise, but it's more kind of like, well, I can loosely do that, and you're afraid to let the project go or the income go. And sometimes you need to say no. So learning to know when to say no is another important piece of business. Like at some point I had to realize that if I'm going to do this coaching thing full time, I've got to learn to say no to design projects. Because I still had people coming all the time asking me to do a project. Hey, could you do a website? Oh, hey, I got your name from so-and-so, right? After you've been in the business 20 years, you get all this and I'm trying to shift towards coaching in like 16, 17, 18. And I got people still constantly for 3 or 4 years were still, all of a sudden I get emails, hey man, can you do this project? And every once in a while I would be like, okay, I'll do it. And then in the project I'd be like, why did I do this? I'd be like regretting even taking on the project. So I learned
halfway through.
What? What's that?
Like the halfway through burnout on a project.
Yeah, you're just
you wish
like,
you didn't
why did I take this on, man? I don't want to work on this project. And so I think that was a really important time where I had to learn, and I had to be okay, because it's fearful to say no. When you say no, I don't need that income. I don't want that money. Like when someone's trying to give you money, and they're trying to give you business, and you're saying, no, I don't want your business. So that's a really hard time. Like that transition time, especially once you've started to step off the ledge a little bit, but if you might have another job still you're holding on to for income because you're scared to make that last step. Now, you shouldn't make a blind step. I want to throw that out there. Don't make blind steps. They need to be educated decisions. They need to be well thought out. Mm-hmm. They need to pencil out a little bit to make sure that before you step out in faith, right, that this is going to work. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Some people do and some people don't. I mean, I know tons of coaches that are struggling coaches right now, that didn't work, So I think learning to say no is an important piece too of stuff that isn't necessarily your specialty.
Hey, Jeff, I want to thank you for taking some time this evening to share your entrepreneurial experience and wisdom. And if any of our listeners want to learn more about your story and some of the endurance coaching services that you offer, how do they find you, and what's that all about?
My website is GoBroncoBilly.com, and Instagram is GoBronco Billy. Both of those are probably the best two places to follow if you want to know what's going on in my life and what's going on in my business. Those are the main ones. And yeah, man, I'm just stoked on life and trying to keep it rolling.
Epic, man. Well, Jeff, I've really enjoyed jamming with you tonight. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode. We'll see you on the next show.
Giddy up.